startling as it is to hear about the 29 recent or current Harper High students shot in 1 year, even more startling is the figure of how many students are impacted by the violence by bearing witness to it. While we can't give you an exact number for how many students have personally seen a shooting or its aftermath, based on the reporting done in This American Life, it seems fair to say that figure would be nearly all of them. And it's impossible to understand structural violence in and around Harper without considering the effects of seeing the violence. One of the reporters for This American Life, Alex Kolowitz, wrote the recent New York Times piece on the issue, saying the ugliness and inexplicability of violence in our cities comes to define you and everyone around you. Just one act of violence, the ground shifts beneath you, your knees buckle, and all you can do is try the best you can to maintain your balance, but it's hard. Back at the table to discuss the psychological effects of growing up witnessing and living in fear of gun violence, Ira Glass, host of This American Life, Jonathan Metzl, professor of psychiatry at Vanderbilt University, and joining them is Ta-Nehisi Coates, senior editor at The Atlantic, and from Chicago, author of that New York Times piece and part of the This American Life series at Harper High, Alex Kolowitz. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Alex, let me start with you on this. The Devontae story and the story of this young man who accidentally shoots his younger brother and then is living with the aftermath. What does this tell us about sort of the psychological impact and his ability to go on as a student?
Right. So, when I was at Harper, I kind of planted myself in the social work office, which was this incredible refuge for the kids, where they would just come in a place where they felt safe and nurtured, as they did in the rest of the school. But there was something really special about that office back there. And Devontae would come in pretty regularly. He had a really close relationship with one of the social workers, Crystal Smith. And, it was clear that Devontae was hurting. I mean, he felt a lot of guilt. He talked about how he would take NyQuil to try to get him to sleep, that before he went to sleep, he'd look at photographs of his brother, who he was very close to. And at one point, towards the end of my stay there, I sat down with Devontae, and Devontae, in a very, I think, a very honest way, just talked about how much he didn't like himself, that he felt that everybody looked at him differently. And you realize that this moment had come to shape who he was. And I think what Crystal was trying to do was to let Devontae know that there was also somebody else there, that it didn't have to shape who he became. And I mean, as you point out, it's one example of many. I mean, most of those kids in that high school have witnessed an act of violence, and it has a profound impact on them.
Now, Ira, I want to ask you about the fact that Alex was sort of posted up in the counseling office, but the existence of that office and of the staff and of the ability to sit and get to know Devontae in a long term over time is because of the resources that were made available to Harper initially, right? And that now may be evaporating.
Yes, exactly. Harper was designated a turnaround school in Chicago, and basically what the people running the schools did was something very sensible. They said, okay, let's try to take money off the table, and let's put as much money in as we can to have enough people tending to these kids. And that was one of these programs which lasted for a few years, and at the end of this year runs out. They lose $1.6 million out of about an $8.8 million budget. And so they're going to lose 11 positions, including that social work office had, I mean, it sounds so small when you hear the number. It's 1.5 counselors. When you think of the number of counselors who go into a place like Sandy Hook or Columbine to counsel people through seeing the effects of violence, but they had this 1.5 counselors, on top of a lot of other adults around the school who are attending after the kids, and they're going to lose 11 positions, including they're going to go down to just having 1/3 time counselor at the end of this year.
And so actually this point that I was just making, Jonathan, I want to come to, and that's that idea of Sandy Hook, right? And of these moments when we have these extraordinary acts of violence and we deploy all these resources into the schools because we recognize, okay, if you were part of the Sandy Hook community, you're going to be experiencing a kind of post-traumatic stress. But then 1.5 counselors for a school, that has had 29 students shot in a year?
Well, as you know, I study guns and mental health, and I thought I knew something about guns and mental health until I listened to the piece yesterday. It was so profound and so disturbing. And what I kept thinking was, we're on the wrong track in a way that after things like Sandy Hook, we talk about mental illness and guns as if mental illness is causing the shooting, but really we're looking at the effects of who gets shot in a way. But really, the kids at the school are living with the constant stress of violence all the time. That in a way, we know from the studies of post-traumatic stress disorder, soldiers, for example, living under the constant threat of violence causes post-traumatic stress, and these children are living under the threat of violence. So if you really want to look at the mental health implications of guns, don't look at just who gets shot. Look at the psychological impact of living in a violent community like that. It is profound.
Tyler, as I was listening, there's this moment when they're trying to decide whether or not to have the homecoming game and dance because there's a violence that is beginning to erupt. And in the 5 minutes of them making this decision, I am on edge. My stomach is sick. I'm weeping along with the counselor about the fact that a child may die. And I mean, this is officially like a first world problem. Like, oh, it's so hard for me to listen to my public radio station. These are the realities of these kids in these communities. Do we care? Like, nationally, do we fundamentally care? Do we get it?
Well, those are two different questions. I think we do care. I think people are human and they do care. I don't know how you can listen to that and not be affected. Do we get it is a very, very different question. Just picking up on the point that was just made about mental health, which is a great point. If you grow up in a community like that, God bless you, may not get shot. You may not even see anyone get shot. But the very fact of living under threat changes how you think about the world. It changes how you interact with people. I was listening at the beginning of the show where they lay out all of those rules about where they walk, who they walk with. Yep. I have to say, I'm from West Baltimore. I was their age about 20, 25 years ago. It's sad that I remember a lot of those rules. And here's the other thing. Every bit of mental energy you spend trying to secure your safety is mental energy taken away from doing well in school.
Right.
I mean, the point of school, right? That's the whole point for why you're going there. But you're spending, and I'm speaking from experience here, 1/3 to 1/2 of your brain to secure your safety. How well are you going to do in school after that?
This is such a great point. Alex, I want to go to you on exactly that, because not only the portion of your brain that you're spending, but the portion of the school day. I mean, it's one of the things when you listen to these hours of all of the months of reporting is you get very little sort of math class, English class as part of this because they're keeping kids alive.
Right. In fact, I remember there was one point, it's not in the piece, but Ms. Sanders had talked about how much she missed the days when she was the curriculum director, because then she could really focus her energy on what was really important about school, which is about education. And now she had to deal with all the stuff that these kids were bringing into the school building from the neighborhood. And I think the other thing that's, important to point out, and what you alluded to, is it's not only the kids who are stressed, but it's also the adults.
Yeah.
I mean, you point to that moment before when they're trying to decide to have the homecoming, and Anita Stewart, one of the counselors, who is asked to come to the homecoming, and she bursts into tears and says, I just can't go. I can't go. She's worried about her own safety. She's, feels like there's just going to, that this is just going to continue, that there's no end in sight. And so you see the incredible stress also on the adults in that school building as well.
Yeah. Alex, thank you so much for joining us from Chicago. I want to let everyone know that you can listen to the 2 episodes of This American Life for free at thisamericanlife.org or by downloading the podcast through iTunes or the Public Radio iPhone app. Up next, could the solution be as simple as a good meal? Well, no, it's not the solution, but it is part of the story when we come back.